I have actually been here and visited Herbert before. We're here today to visit the final resting place of folk musician Tiny Tim, Herbert Khaury. Tiptoe through the tulips. I believe we found him in the lower basement area here in this mausoleum, if I remember right when we were here last time. Tiny Tim was extremely religious in his life. Tree of life down here. Right when we get down to the tree of life, you make a left. Right over here is the final resting place. Had a lot of names for himself. Larry the Singing Canary and various other things, but here's Herbert Khaury, Mr. Tiny Tim. Lived from 1932 to 1996. Grew up in New York. I think a lot of people looked at Tiny Tim as kind of a spectacle or a sideshow, and he kind of saw himself as that too, but he really was a very devoted performer. He would perform pretty much his entire life, from making, you know, sometimes up to $50,000 in Vegas, or as little as almost next to nothing, just because he liked to perform. He said he almost couldn't think of any night in his life where he wasn't out playing a ukulele or singing somewhere in a back alley or an amateur club or something throughout his life. Even as a kid, he was kind of strange. He had a Victrola that he would only have one record to listen to, and he would play it over and over for hours, just cranking that record. It was the Beautiful Ohio, and he would listen and listen and listen and just become obsessed in his younger days with 1930s crooner music. Rudy Valley he really loved and would often imitate, and then later on when he started performing and befriending Greenwich Village musicians like Bob Dylan, he would actually tell them that those were his big influences. He was very musical, even as a young man. He learned how to play guitar before he was 10, and then eventually learned how to play the violin and, of course, the ukulele, and just loved to play music. And he was always kind of an oddball in his area. He'd slick his hair down, he would wear suits, he just really didn't fit in. And then he saw Rudy Valentino in an old picture, and he started putting white makeup on his face and growing his hair out long, and that became his look. You would see him walking around New York City in like 1954 looking like the Tiny Tim that we would pretty much know throughout the rest of his life. He basically started with odd jobs, and then when he started making a little bit of money performing in those amateur shows, like I said, he would just He basically figured out when he had an appendectomy one time how to sing falsetto, and once he discovered it, he thought it was different enough that that's something he should do all the time, so that's how he would perform, with the falsetto, with the ukulele. And he said, you know, he thought if you're different, that sticks out to people.
Oh, Sunny Beach and Peppermint Bay, lemonade stand everywhere, cracking jam.
So he wanted to sound different, he wanted to be different, and a talent scout saw him, ended up wanting to make a record with him, so he moved to Los Angeles for a while, made a record. Tiny Tim was not a great songwriter, he was not known for that. He actually was the opposite. He loved doing cover songs and telling people who originally was responsible for that great song. And Tiptoe Through the Tulips would become a hit because they would end up, as a way of promoting him, put him on, well, gave him an audition anyway for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
The toast of Greenwich Village in his first appearance anywhere, Tiny Tim.
And when he showed up and performed, they just thought he was hilarious. And they would do a bit with him where he would be out performing and they would keep acting like he was done and start a preliminary like applause to get him off stage. And he was just very likable though on stage. So he ended up doing Johnny Carson, and unfortunately on his first performance, he was actually on the same day that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So they eventually had him come back, and while he had been out promoting his new record, he was doing like an autograph signing and fell in love with a 16-year-old girl he would name Miss Vicky. See, he was like 37 and she was 16, and they started dating, and people would say it wasn't that he was so much of a pervert or anything, it was just that he was so religious. He would spend hours reading the Bible, and he looked at them like a younger aged woman as like purity.
All my songs, I always go in a dream world and I think of young beautiful angels about 19 years old. And pure thoughts, of course.
So they started dating for a couple of weeks, fell in love, and he proposed. And he was old school. He wanted like, you know, a subservient wife. And when he came back on Johnny Carson, he told them about her and told them that they were going to get married. And when they went to commercial or took a break, someone told Johnny, hey, tell them they can get married here. So he offered to have them get married on the show, and that's exactly what they did when Miss Vicky was 17. Now, he said that she cheated on him. He would say in an interview that he found out that she had a man writing her letters and that she had been unfaithful before they were married. And he was really upset by that. Apparently blew his top at her, which I think he didn't necessarily say that he hit her, but it kind of seemed like maybe he was physical. And she was actually, they'd had a kid together. She ended up going to New Jersey and filed for divorce. He never ever believed in divorce and never would have wanted it, so he never really considered the divorce being real. But yeah, he basically never, from what I read, never took care of or really had a relationship with his daughter. And he would just continue to, you know, he made another record. Didn't do all that great, of course, because he was like a novelty act. He would perform in sideshows when he was trying to make money in the early days, and he saw himself as like a vaudeville type performer, so he didn't actually feel bad about doing that kind of stuff. He looked at himself as a flash in the pan and just saw himself as like, I'm lucky to have had the success that I had, and now I just need to make enough to get by. And he basically lived like that for several years. Not to be mean, I always thought he had a very peculiar appearance. I think the first time I ever saw him, he was in some sort of like short clip in a commercial. I actually thought he was Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch of the West, when I saw it. And then I did see like a rerun of Laugh-In, his appearance on there. And then growing up, I would watch Howard Stern's show, and he was a frequent guest on there, but Howard apparently didn't know that Tiny Tim was very, very devout and very religious, and Howard kept saying Jesus and things like that over and over. And finally, Tiny Tim, even though he'd been on the show several times, started kind of laying into Howard saying, I don't appreciate you being disrespectful, and I'm not going to put up with it. And the interview kind of took a sad turn. And Gary Delabate, Baba Booey, for the Howard Stern show, said they tried to contact Herbert, Tiny Tim, half a dozen times to get him on the show, and he would refuse every single time. One thing that always stuck out in my mind about him was that when he was on Howard Stern, he would talk about how he was a proponent of adult diapers and that he wore them all the time. He said they were very sanitary, very clean. He would use like a certain Vaseline lotion on one half of his body and then a different kind on the other half of his body. There were certain foods he wouldn't eat. He was even diabetic. I mean, he had a lot of health problems in his life, but he had like a really peculiar diet, things that he would eat at certain times of the year. But I did see a lot of comments online with people that were friends with him that said he was the nicest, most genuine guy you could ever meet. He was Very kind, and if you were respectful, he was very respectful back. But yeah, Howard Stern just, as you can imagine, you know, just didn't take it seriously. And for someone who like Herbert, who was very, very devout and would spend hours a day praying and things like that, he really just couldn't get past it. Now, he's actually buried here in Minnesota, outside of Minneapolis, because in 1979 he got married for the third time to Miss Sue. And Miss Sue and he moved to Minneapolis, and that's where they lived out their days. I believe she had family in the area because he was very sick at the end of his life because of the diabetes, and he was told not to perform anymore, but he loved to do it. Like I said, he really didn't even care if there was money involved. He knew people wanted to see him, and if even one person came out to see him, he wanted to see them back. So a month before he died, he was performing in Massachusetts and had a heart attack. Had to be taken to the hospital and was told there that he needed to recuperate, that he needed to not perform anymore. This is his last performance. He went out in front of the women's club here in town, and the band leader basically didn't announce him, sent the band on a break because they didn't know any of his songs, and most of the crowd left, but there were just a couple people there, and he figured if there were a couple people there to see him, he wanted to perform, so he got up and he did Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and Miss Vicky asked him if he was okay, and he said no, and right there they started to work on him, and he ended up dying. So in a weird way, it was kind of a nice thing that something he loved so much, which was performing, and that he just put his heart and soul into so often and with such explosive. If you watch his performances, you really never knew what you were going to see. I found all kinds of videos, like no two performances were really the same, so he put so much into it, it's almost fitting that he would get one last performance of his hit song before he would call it an end to his earthly life here. That's something else that he kind of thought about. He always kind of assumed at some point life would evolve to living in space, and he was kind of hoping he would be around long enough to see it, but fortunately he wasn't. Tiny Tim. The guy had several different names that he performed by in his early years, but he went with Tiny Tim because of the obvious Charles Dickens connection, but he also went by Derry Dover, Sir Timothy Timms. I'm hoping that Miss Sue will be buried here. She, from everything I found, was a really sweet person, and people that knew them both said she was really the true love that he needed in his life. He was hung up on Vicky because he didn't believe in divorce and all that, and he didn't want it, but Miss Sue was the one that truly loved him, truly took care of him. She was a Harvard graduate, and was a fan of his since since she was young, and truly appreciated him. Didn't mock him the way a lot of people did. She truly saw the beauty in his personality and who he was and the way he felt about things, and that's a beautiful thing. So I hope she'll be here at some point. Now his parents, his father was kind of supportive of his musical endeavors and his musicality, but his mother looked at the way he dressed and how he behaved and how he acted, and she literally wanted to have a psychiatric evaluation done. She wanted to take him to Bellevue and have them make sure he wasn't completely insane, or if he was, she wanted to find out how to get him back to being normal. It was his father that stepped in and stopped her from sending him off to a padded cell somewhere. Kind of makes you wonder if these flowers are for him. Forever tiptoeing through the tulips, forever in falsetto. Even though Tiny Tim loved the falsetto, he loved the 1930s music, that's not all he would cover. He actually would do songs by, like, The Doors. So I thought that was pretty cool, the gamut he would cover in his musicality. Now we're gonna head over, since it's only 2 miles away, we're gonna go over and see where he performed his last show. November 30th, 1996. This was the Women's Club of Minneapolis. And this is where Herbert Khaury, Tiny Tim performed that very last show. He actually had a limousine bring him to the event, and my friend Scott Michaels had interviewed Miss Sue, and she said that when he got out of the limo and was walking up onto the sidewalk that he lost his footing and almost fell. Very fitting because they did have a paramedic come. I'm gonna see if there's any way to go inside while we're here. Stage door. All right, no success. That is a, they're actually still using that. That's a women's club and it's pretty full, so I can't go in there. But yeah, he had had his incident a month before and was told not to perform because he actually needed heart surgery. His heart was only operating at 40% and he didn't want to have the surgery. He said he wanted to basically join God with the same heart that he had when he was alive without any scars on it or anything. So he showed up to perform here as a kind of as a favor to his wife's mom, and because people loved him. And he was waiting to be called up, but the band leader apparently didn't know that he was going to be here and didn't like him. So for hours after they ate, even though Tiny Tim was not feeling well, his health was not good, he had already stumbled coming in, he continued to wait. They went and got the organizer and said, you know, he really needs to go on right now because he needs to go home, he's wearing out. So the band leader, like I told you earlier, just sent his entire band off to a break, had no intentions of them backing him up. And Tiny Tim went up with a ukulele that was not in tune and did his best performance that he could give. And right after Tiptoe Through the Tulips, you could see that he was swaying and had trouble kind of walking up there anyway. And she went up and asked him if he was okay. He said no, and they got a doctor that was here to start helping him while they waited for a paramedic to arrive. Fortunately, they took him to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. As a kind of a nice goodwill thing, he actually had the last suit that he was performing in cut up, and my friend Scott Michaels, who has a channel called Dearly Departed, he actually has a piece of the fabric, you know, I guess a swatch of his last suit. It was cut up and given to fans. So rest in peace, Tiny Tim. At least you had one last go, one last song. They have a lot of plaques there on the wall, 3 of them right there in fact, and I was hoping one of them would be the last performance of Tiny Tim, but unfortunately no. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Have a good night and tiptoe through the tulips.